Hi, everyone. I hope you're keeping safe and healthy. Thank you for joining us today for the monthly KT Canada webinar series. My name is Kate Sibley. I'm based at the University of Manitoba, and I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Tasneem Jankaro, who will be presenting to us today. Dr. Jankaro will be giving a presentation for about 45 minutes, after which we'll have time for some questions. Please type your questions into the chat box, and Megan will read them out for all of us when we're done. So Dr. Tasneem Jankaro originally trained as an engineer and later completed a degree in cognitive science. She attained a PhD in rehabilitation science and biomedical engineering in 2018. Currently, she works as a postdoctoral researcher in the field of digital health behavior change at the University of Toronto. And I'll pass it over to you now.
Okay, so thanks very much. I really just would like to thank KT Canada. I'd like to thank all of you actually as well who are attending this meeting today. I am experiencing a few technical difficulties. I'm also working with two different computers here, so if there's a little bit of a lag in my slides or the talk, please just be patient with me if you can. While I'm thanking people, though, I would like to extend my thanks to the University of Toronto, and in particular Dr. Susan Jaglal and the Jaglal Lab, as well as the Craig Nielsen Foundation for their support. So today I'll be talking about digital health behavior change. And as you're aware, it's challenging, it's complex, and at the same time, its growth appears to be exponential. Last week's Economist described digital medicine, including digital wellness and disease prevention, as the next trillion-dollar industry. Now, in that article, they wrote that the pandemic has also highlighted that existing providers' snazzy hardware and pricey services too seldom genuinely improve health outcomes. If the new generation of digital technologies, they write, is to thrive, it must improve health. So today I'll be talking about digital health behavior change with a focus on research. And I'll take a big picture perspective from systems engineering.
Nina, if you could just speak up a little bit louder. I know you're using your phone, so it's probably a little bit quiet. So if you could just speak up a little bit, you're just a little bit quiet.
Okay, is that better?
That is better. That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. Okay, so, and please, if I do get a little bit too soft, just feel free to interrupt me and just let me know. So I'll begin by outlining the problem that we're encountering, taking a step back and describing what digital health behavior change is, its key research question, and how we can approach that question. To foreshadow, I'll begin talking about complexity and challenges associated with complex systems. Then I'll turn to a possible solution in systems engineering and a particular model in that discipline. The model includes a tool that I'll call the functional system map. I'll introduce the map, and then I'll turn to practice and show you how it can be used. The project I'll describe is an online health coaching program that's underway right now. So I'll discuss that a little bit. And then finally, to sum up, I'll circle back to the key research question and the value of this map. It's a lot of information to cover. I'll try and keep the content fairly high level, and we can get to details in the discussion. But before I begin, I'd like to share an idea with you that was related to me some years ago when I was in an immersive 2-week course in a remote town. And in the final talk on the final night, this is what the teacher shared with us. It's not radical to act rapidly, it's radical to act fundamentally. So I ask you, in your behavior change research, what is it to act fundamentally? My answer begins with an understanding of what we mean by digital health behavior change. So starting with the first component, digital. The word comes from digitus, the Latin meaning finger. Using our fingers was the first system of counting. Now, though, digital, of course, is defined as a series of zeros and ones associated with data and signal processing. Often when we say digital, we might first think of devices, but it's important to remember that this presupposes an underlying infrastructure and much more. It means internet access, skills training, staffing, applications that run on a platform, a database, and on and on. So digital is much more complicated than the device a person uses or the browser they prefer. There's an underlying complexity, as I can attest to you at this moment with these multiple computers running and multiple browsers running and on and on. So that complexity, it's associated with the device and the applications, and it sort of runs behind all that. Now, turning to the second component, health. The original definition of health is Germanic, and it means wholeness. The World Health Organization keeps close to that definition, too. For them, health is complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So that sets a high bar, and it takes virtually all facets of human life into consideration. Well-being, when we look at that, it's not a straightforward construct either. In 2016, the MGHA published a review of 99 different self-report measures to assess well-being. So again, nothing simple about this notion, which brings me to the third component, behavior. Behavior comes from the verb behave, a combination of be and have. Be from the Middle English, meaning thoroughly, and have, to have or bear oneself in a particular way. So to thoroughly or wholly carry oneself in some way. It suggests a commitment to conduct or action. And it also suggests an enduring or long-term commitment. In their entry on behavior change interventions, the Dictionary of Epidemiology refers to techniques. I think you know where I'm going with this. In a 2013 article describing a behavior change taxonomy, the authors, Nishi et al., identified 93 distinct behavior change techniques. So again, nothing simple. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. So now let's turn to the question that as behavior change researchers, we're expected to answer. What works, for who, under what circumstances, to change what behavior, and how? That's the question from an interdisciplinary team of implementation scientists, also led by Susan Nishi. Many of you will recognize it, and I consider it to be the key question in this field. Along similar lines, a team of health psychologists believe that researchers need, quote, strategies that are effective in promoting behavior change for whom and under what circumstances. So both sets of investigators raise similar issues. Also, they're both concerned with precision. This is a detailed question. It requires a detailed degree of precision for the research to advance. Here we see a reformatted version of the question, and I'm showing it to you for two reasons. First is to foreshadow where we're headed in this talk, because you'll see this again before I'm done. And second, to indicate the complexity of the task that we face. To take an example, you're probably all familiar with fitness trackers. And if you can see this, this is my fitness tracker. It's not a Fitbit. It's a different brand. And I can tell you that unfortunately, I abandoned this a few months after I bought it. Now, can it work? Yes, but for me it didn't work. It was designed for one particular circumstance and not the one I wanted. So it worked, but only in a limited context. These questions, can it work and does it work, are two very different questions. This is just my experience, but now let's look a little more closely at the research findings for fitness trackers. The short version is that results from a 2019 systematic review are disappointing. For health outcomes like weight loss, blood pressure, blood glucose, and cholesterol level, reviewers found results to be, as they say, inconsistent. Taking a closer look at weight loss, 4 of 5 studies found no significant long-term improvement. And in one study, the control group outperformed the treatment group. It's clearly not the result anyone wants, but it's a difficult problem. And in general, Mishi and colleagues believe we are still mainly in this age of promise rather than delivery. It's a state that is linked to an ongoing issue as well, expressed in 2012 by Grimshaw and al. That basically we have a failure to translate research into practice. So why is this research problem so hard? In a word, I think it's hard because it's complex. Now, there are several characteristics associated with complex systems. Many of you will be familiar with lists like this already, so I won't go into it now. But the difficulty is not in identifying the characteristics. It's in what these characteristics imply. And what they imply is self-organization, meaning that there are first hidden factors that can cause system-wide change, so that's non-specific, that unplanned actions can unfold in real time, emergent, that causal factors can be multiple, distributed. We just need today to look at the pandemic and follow from that to see all this at play. So in other words, self-organizing systems are systems capable of changing themselves, with chains of causality that can be uncertain and consequences that can be unintended. So now we're left with the question, how do we analyze these systems? Investigators are advising a strategic approach to analyzing the systems. One team recommends using modular plans to specify relevant components and contexts of use, and to build coherent knowledge structures for development and evaluation. That's the Mishi team. To foreshadow, the functional system maps that I'm going to talk about soon can align with this recommendation of modularity. Along similar veins, another team recommends a 4-phase roadmap to specify, validate, and manipulate behavior change targets and techniques. Critical to both sets of recommendations is that they agree on the complexity of these systems and on the need for precision. They also offer high-level recommendations, which are very valuable. What they don't offer are methods or tools, and understandably, because every problem is unique, but they don't offer that. And so what we're left with now is the question, how do we operationalize these suggestions? Now, before I continue, I just need to do a little bit of a recap. Essentially, the argument so far is that digital health behavior change is complex Because of that, the situation is difficult to characterize. And in turn, the research question is hard to answer. Recommendations suggest taking a strategic approach to how we evaluate complex systems by modularizing or by using phased roadmaps. Finally, the question that I just ended with was, how do we operationalize these suggestions? Now, it seems to me that if we're dealing with a complex system, then why not use tools intended to study complex systems? And that brings me to cognitive systems engineering. The principle here is simple. The message is in the structure, not the data. So, cognitive systems engineering is an approach introduced by Jens Rasmussen. He was a Danish engineer, and it was later advanced by a Canadian engineer named Kim Vicente in Toronto. Many others have, since the 90s and 2000s, really further developed this approach. So there's a lot written about it. I'm going to try and keep this, again, fairly high level. Now, to summarize, this is an approach that superimposes structure on a system. It's been described as a common frame of reference and as a cross-disciplinary marketplace. Now, given the interdisciplinary nature of digital health behavior change, both these ideas, a common frame of reference and a cross-disciplinary marketplace, seem useful. The structure that this framework revolves around is the notion of constraints, and in particular, constraints that shape behavior. Now, to illustrate this, I'll begin with an example of a mountain climber. So if we think of a climber, the climber's path is irregular, complex, hard to describe. But the complexity is really a complexity in the surface of the mountain, not a complexity in the climber. This example, it actually comes from Herbert Simon's parable of the ant on the beach, where he explains the complexity of the ant's trajectory is not in the ant, it's in the beach. And what does this mean? It means the characteristics of natural environments that we're in shape the course of our action. Those characteristics don't dictate behavior, but they do shape it. So in rehab science, for example, we talk about environments in terms of enablement and disablement. Some characteristics in the environment enable, others disable. In systems engineering language, those characteristics would be called behavior shaping constraints. So now let's look at another example. We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. This refers to artificial or built environments. Here, we might think of our own homes, for example, and how our homes shape our behavior. Churchill, though, said this comment referring to a discussion about rebuilding the Houses of Parliament in London, which were bombed in 1941. So he means a lot when he says they shape us. Finally, turning to social cognitive theory, as many of you know, this is a theory commonly invoked in behavior change research. It's from cognitive psychology, but it extends far beyond the individual to include the social. Albert Bandura, in his 2001 review article, frequently refers to the relationship between the cognitive and the social, or the cognitive and the cultural. So he explains that human functioning is analyzed within the dynamics of various societal subsystems. He also refers to cultural embeddedness that shapes the ways in which efficacy beliefs are characterized. So he's talking about our functioning and our beliefs as being situated in social, societal, and cultural settings. Again, to use Rasmussen's language from cognitive systems engineering, he's talking about constraints that shape behavior. Now, as you can imagine, there are many forces that shape our behavior. These are various pressures at play even before we investigate an individual's needs and preferences. That's one of the keys to this approach. Our opportunities for action are to some extent already formed from the beginning. In keeping with Bandura, then, it's not to say that there's no agency. It's to say that agency is understood, as he says, within the dynamics of other systems. So now let's go back to our digital behavior change system. Again, all these constraints, technological, economic, cultural, and so on, are at play before we even get to analyzing the individual. This is the argument from cognitive systems engineering. It includes social determinants of health. Those will be among these. But the sets of constraints in systems engineering. Okay, so let me just start again with this slide. I was talking about constraints and shifted to the digital health behavior change system. And again, saying that all these constraints, technological, economic, cultural, and on, are at play before we even get to analyzing the individual. So social determinants of health would be among these constraints, but the sets of constraints in systems engineering, that in this approach, they go quite a bit further than that. Now, given this complex network of constraints, the question then becomes, how do we proceed? And we proceed on to slide 25, Megan. Now, Rasmussen believes that no one exclusive hierarchical and objective classification scheme will serve to unravel the complexity. What we need is a kind of teleological taxonomy, and by that he meant a pragmatic, goal-directed taxonomy useful for the analyst. And that's what he developed. I described the theory already. Now the taxonomy that he developed is called cognitive work analysis, slide 26. Basically, CWA is a holistic framework that relies on the notion of behavior shaping constraints. So as I mentioned, action and opportunities for action are tied to circumstance. That's the crux of the framework. Because it's concerned with cognitive work, it's suited to information systems. It has a history of use in healthcare and in behavior change, so it's been used to design and develop digital health behavior change systems already. Now, by now, you may be asking yourself on slide 27, do I need another framework? Especially because health sciences, you all know, is already loaded with frameworks. And the answer, of course, is yes, or at least maybe. Now, why is that? First, unlike social cognitive theory, CWA includes technical environments. So in digital health, naturally, that's key. And second, importantly, CWA has tools. I spoke earlier about research suggestions in this field, the discussion about modularizing and using a research roadmap. Those are very useful, but there are no tools to implement those suggestions. So now we have some tools, and this is what sets CWA apart and what makes it valuable. So slide 28, the tools are used to identify the fundamental underlying constraints of a system. Those constraints are invariants, imposed by a system before personal preferences come into play. You'll notice that we haven't even got to the individual yet because a host of other conditions define the space in which we inhabit. CWA starts by looking at the system and then turns to the individual. Now it has 5 tools in total on slide 29. So you can analyze a system along these various dimensions. Today, though, we'll only be concerned with the first one, which is the purpose-oriented dimension, using a tool that I call the functional system map on slide 30. Formally, we should know, first of all, that this is actually called the abstraction hierarchy in the system. So if you do a search for the abstraction hierarchy. I call it the functional system map because I think it's a good description of what it actually is. Now it begins at the top with why. So again, it's purpose-driven, and then it shifts to components like values, priorities, and constraints. At the bottom of the analysis, that depicts how those purposes are instantiated, ending with specific forms associated with the system. Those are individual components and their specifications, so you get very detailed there. The idea is that those basic components at the bottom align with the overarching purpose or goal at the top. So in essence, this is a very detailed means-ends analysis. Now, you can take different perspectives when building a system map like this. It might be different stakeholder perspectives. It might be different disciplinary perspectives. The idea is to use the map to, again, deconstruct and modularize the complex behavior change system into its socio-technical parts, and then deploy a research strategy to study those parts. That strategy might be, as I said, a research roadmap, but it might be an adaptive trial. It might be another approach you have in mind. On slide 31, typically CWA is actually used for front-end design. And what I'm suggesting today is that we start to adopt it and use it for behavior change research. On slide 32, I listed this slide, included this slide, because I realize it's a lot to digest, and these are just some of the textbooks on the topic. So it's really quite involved. What I hope you've gotten so far from it is a sense of the theory related to behavior shaping constraints. But in general, regarding cognitive systems engineering, some call this a mindset. And I've come to appreciate this perspective because I find myself actually thinking in terms of how systems fit together. Now, on slide 33, I'd like to give you another review again of where we are in the argument so far. We began with digital health behavior change and saw its complexity. Because of that complexity, the key question is hard to answer. So I turned to systems engineering to analyze the complexity and to a theory from Rasmussen on the constraints imposed upon an actor that shape our behavior. I also invoked Bandura and social cognitive theory, and we saw that he spoke about how we're immersed within dynamic social systems and embedded within cultures. Cognitive work analysis is the framework that Rasmussen developed. CWA has tools, and that's its value. One tool, the functional system map, deconstructs a system into its various constraints and functional parts. That's where we are now. Now, in the last part of the talk, I'll give you an overview of the current project on slide 34. It's called SCI&U. It's a peer health coaching program for people with spinal cord injuries. Now, peer health coaching means that it involves trained health coaches who are peers. So both the coaches and the participants have a spinal cord injury. This is an online program in that the coaches and the participants usually communicate via an embedded video conferencing application, which is on a personalized platform. On slide 35 lists what typical coaching sessions look like. They can take approximately 45 minutes, depending quite a bit on the participants. They usually start with a check-in, something like, how are you today? A health topic, maybe is physical activity. A self-management topic, something like problem solving. A brief action plan, which is a detailed plan, and finally a sign-off. So this is a very structured conversation, but it is led by the participants' interest, and that's key for the program. So it really depends on where the participant wants to go with it. Now, on slide 36 is a mock-up of a digital platform. So this is not a real user. But what the platform lists are users' goals, plans, and resources. Now, behind the scenes, though, is this on slide 37. It's a network of people and technologies, the classic socio-technical system. Starting at the top, I would use my pointer, but it won't work. So I'll try and do it by color. Starting at the top with the purple people icons, we have participants at home using their communication devices. So that's at noon. At 3 o'clock, we have, in yellow, we have coaches who are doing the same at home using their communication devices. At, say, 5 o'clock in the bottom right-hand corner, the gray, trainers who are certified, who certify the coaches annually. In purpley blue, beside the trainers, are developers and administrators who work on technical aspects, including a third-party vendor who handles the database. Beside them, we have a team of researchers at the university who are handling all the assessments and so on. And along the left side are several advisory groups and other stakeholders. So among them, it includes a research advisory committee, a community advisory group, funding bodies, and various SCI community associations. So there's a lot to manage here. I should just mention that this is really just the Canadian side. There's also an American mirror side. Now, clearly, you can see that this aligns with many of the characteristics of complex systems. And to analyze it, I've divided the system into 4 on slide 38. These are 4 system maps. The first is the human environment. That includes some aspects of social and technological subsystems, including all the human cognitive and emotional systems that are there. The second map is the behavior change theory and technique. In SCI&U, we use social cognitive theory, and so that's what's depicted. The third map is the digital environment. This one is quite technical. And in the fourth map is the operating environment, which in our case is a research environment. Now, were the project ready for commercialization, a business environment map would have been included here too. So I'm using 4 maps because it's too much information to show on only one map. But you can see that, like this Venn diagram, there's overlap on the map. So, for example, in the case of SCI&U and function, for some people with SCI, might be relevant. This would be depicted on the first map in the human environment, but it may also relate to how an interface is designed. So it might also relate to the third map, the digital environment. Now, just before we look at a map, moving to slide 39, if you recall earlier, I mentioned self-organization, meaning that there are hidden factors that cause system-wide change. So I said non-specific, that unplanned actions can unfold in real time. That's emergent. That causal factors can be multiple. That's distributed. So now let's see how this affected the SCI&U project on slide 40. There were a number of perturbations, and I'm just going to mention a few of them here. So, for example, in the human environment, video conferencing privacy. This is all in the last year, by the way. Video conferencing privacy became a substantial issue. So we secured secure accounts to combat that. As we all know, the pandemic on the human map, of course, there's the threat of fatal illness, and everybody's anxiety skyrockets. Other situations, we had coaches hospitalized, and we also had friendships develop between coaches and participants. Again, the pandemic affected the coaches. It also affected the program, so that new topics like mental health needed to be drafted. In the digital environment, we had platform outages. And what happened there were certificates expired, which we didn't anticipate. We also had video conferencing disruptions, so we just had really technical glitches, software failures, like today, video problems and audio problems that I'm having. We also, as you recall, had the threat of Zoom bombing. And finally, in the research environment, having coaches hospitalized means, is there a delay in administering the program? How does that affect morale again? And as well with the pandemic, now it means that recruitment drops. So these are just some of the issues that came up because other things are happening in the world. So now what I'd like to do, though, is I've been talking about maps. Let's look at some, actually one, on slide 40. Now, here we have the human environment. I'm just reminding you of what the map looks like. And I'm just going to go fairly quickly through this. On slide 42, there's a lot on this map. This is actually what the map looks like. I don't want to, as I said, I don't want to go through it, but I want to highlight just 3 things. First, the structure. And I just want to ask, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
yep.
Great. I want to highlight these 3 things, that the structure, Rasmussen emphasized structure again over data. And we answer, again, why as we move up, how as we move down. Second, the dependencies. There are lines of dependencies that you can see, and what that means is that a change at one level, you can then see how that might affect other levels. And finally, I'll highlight the detail. So you can get quite detailed and drill down and examine each component individually, asking questions about the information or data you can obtain in that component. So can the component be measured? Can it be observed? And so on. So with the map, you can do this analysis up front to decide what you're measuring at one phase in research and what you're not measuring in that phase. The point is that you can make planned, conscious decisions ahead of time. You can plan to be flexible. So maybe taking an adaptive trial approach, as I said. In the case of SCI&U, something like the pandemic happens, and you already know, well, you can adapt your health topics because content was not part of the study at this point. So with the map, you have a chance to reflect on what's next because you can see the system in front of you. You can look at the map and plan your course. So structure, dependencies, and detail are all qualities of this map. So that gives you a sense of what it looks like. Now, slide 43, here's the second map depicting behavior change theory and techniques. Again, I'm not going to show this one, but for SCI&U, the purpose would be self-management. The techniques at the level of general system relate to coaching, and the coaching tactics at the subsystem level would include, say, shared stories or role play, and so on. Constraints would include ethical standards, cultural norms, staffing limits, and so on. On slide 44, this third map depicts the digital environment. Here the purpose might be sustainability. The functional components relate to software considerations like requirements, architecture, and coding. Metrics would be listed on this map too, software metrics. And constraints might include ISO standards, cybersecurity, and IT governance. The fourth map on slide 45 depicts the research environment. Here, the goal of a health researcher would be to improve health outcomes. Constraints would include scheduling, ethics, standards, staffing, budgets, and so on. And when it comes to, say, something like budgets, drilling down to how those are administered could be on the map, because sometimes there's a lag between winning the award and actually receiving the funds. So there's another example of constraints at work. Beyond winning the award, the funds need to be transferred to a research account. So a delay in that means a delay in hiring. It means a delay maybe in development or in administering the program. So we can see again how one event can ripple through the system. In fact, once we know the various functional components in a system, we can stand back and ask, what if this component fails? Can the project still continue? Is there enough flexibility built into the system so the actors can adapt? It might be a funding glitch or a technology glitch, or someone gets sick. Can the actors and the system respond? So you can drill down into these critical components and speculate what could happen. Also on this map, we can include research project management, for instance, so activities that an ethics board as well might expect. There can also be other research perspectives. So design research will have their priorities. For example, what kind of design approach they might want to try using, and so on. Now, slide 46, I'll give you, what I've just given you is a quick tour of the map. And now I'd like to review again the purpose of these maps on slide 47. It comes back to the key research question and how to answer it. So slide 48. Now to reiterate, the point of the map is to help us understand the system. 1, to answer the key question, to do that in a planned manner, and to address precision gaps in the research. To address the gaps, we drill down to the lowest functional component that's meaningful, and we identify qualitative and quantitative research methods that apply. This information can be depicted as a dashboard to describe what works in an intervention. And on slide 49, it can also detail what doesn't work. On slide 50, the point again is understanding. It's not that we're going to get the map right the first time or maybe even ever. It won't be perfect. but it's a map that evolves, and as it evolves, our understanding of the fundamental underlying structure of the system deepens. It means we can see the system in front of us so we can communicate and collaborate. As a team, we know what we're prioritizing at the top level and what we're studying at the bottom level. So from a place of understanding, we can think about implementing that research suggestions like modularizing or implementing a research roadmap or an adaptive trial. Because we gain a breadth and depth of understanding, it's also how, in the context of digital health behavior change, on slide 51, how we might act fundamentally. So slide 52, I'll end it there. I really appreciate everyone for your patience with the issues that we've had today, and I'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Tasneem, and I apologize as well for our technological issues. Once in a while, WebEx is finicky, and today it seemed to do all the finics. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so I can have a look at the chat. Okay.
I don't think we've had any questions come in yet.
Not yet? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Giancarlo. That was fascinating, and I think a really great example of how increasingly in knowledge translation and implementation science, there's been a lot of talk about complexity, and as the field has evolved, how we need to better embrace that. And I think this was a really great example of how to operationalize complexity, and it's not easy. It's not simple. So if I can launch into a question, while others are typing in, I was interested if you could talk maybe a little bit about the development of the maps. Is this an independent activity? How do you reach consensus on the final outcomes of the maps? Are clinicians and patients involved in making these outcome maps? Could you talk a little bit more about how you got to them?
Sure. No one person really can come up with a map on their own. What often happens is it can be something like a qualitative study, for example, or qualitative methods that are used to start drafting a map. So an analyst might meet with, let's just take the research example, meet with various researchers, explain the map, and discuss with researchers, well, what is the purpose of, what you're doing, and how do you do that? And there are various methods. So it can be meeting and having informal discussions. It can be interviews. It can be observation. It can be document reviews. What the analyst is doing is bringing the structure, but the content comes from everybody else. So it is very much a collaborative thing. And it's not as if the analyst is right, because the analyst, if she's good, will make sure that what's on the map is actually accurate. The other thing that often comes into play is that people need to decide what the priorities are. So it's not the analyst who makes those decisions. It's very much the other people who are involved, so the other researchers. So it's very much a community effort, and it's very iterative too. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And I guess one short follow-up. Do you see these maps as, would they be a publishable, I guess, research output in and of themselves, or or is their primary purpose in the development of the protocol and in the design phase of research?
In my opinion, they're quite publishable. Now, cognitive work analysis, for example, is an established system. It has been used in healthcare. It's been published in healthcare. There is a review article. It happens to be called 20 Years of Cognitive Work Analysis in Healthcare, which I worked on during my PhD, which lists many of different research projects and which have already been published, and they would discuss, for example, what their system map might look like. Now, just as a reminder, they would call it an abstraction hierarchy because that's the official name. So that is very much published, and the approach is also used in behavior change, digital health behavior change. In terms of for systems, I think that involve cardiovascular studies. I'm sorry, I'm just a little distracted here because my system has just decided to tell me the tab crashed. So I'm distracted.
We can still hear you.
Good. Okay. Yeah, so it's very much a possibility for publishing. It's like that's not out of the question at all. The other thing I should just add now is that, as you can see, I've been working on these maps, and the idea is that we develop some templates for this field, for digital health behavior change, that other researchers can use as a starting point and adapt for their own work. So that's something that may be available in the future.
Thank you. We had any questions come in online, Megan?
I'm not seeing anything so far, and I guess we only have about a minute left. So unless anyone has any final thoughts, and you can always send it in afterwards too, and we can make sure it gets to Dr. Giancarlo to follow up with you. But maybe we should start wrapping up, Katie.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for attending today and for your patience as we've navigated our virtual environment. I will remind you all to please complete the online evaluation, which Megan will send you or has sent you already.
Oh.
And sorry, Will has?
It's been sent, but I'll remind and I'll send it around again.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And this is our KT Canada's last webinar for 2020. A reminder that the next webinar and the first one of 2021 in a new year will be Thursday, January 14th with Dr. Gogavor, who will be discussing sex and gender issues in knowledge translation. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Dr. Sibley, and thank you, Dr. Giancarlo, and thanks to everyone for your patience, and apologies that we had a lot of technical issues today, and maybe we'll be doing Zoom in the new year. Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Bye. Thanks, Dr. Giancarlo.